The boy who saw his father. The playground was bathed in the warm afternoon sun, illuminating children laughing and playing as if they had not a care in the world. 6-year-old Liam was no exception. His brown curls bounced with each energetic leap, his worn-out soccer ball tucked under his arm. His eyes sparkled with a sense of adventure, and his steps quickened as he approached the swings. It was his favorite spot, where he could practice kicking his soccer ball without worrying about anyone getting in the way. Emma, his mother, sat on a sun-warmed bench nearby. She was half-focused on her phone, checking her work schedule for the following week at the small family-owned restaurant she managed. Every so often, she would glance up to keep an eye on Liam, a gentle smile on her lips. He was everything to her, the love of her life, her joy, and her greatest treasure. Liam was growing so quickly, it seemed like just yesterday that he was learning to walk. "Watch this, Mom," Liam shouted, positioning himself to attempt a trick shot. "I'm watching, honey," Emma replied, putting her phone down to give him her full attention. Liam kicked the ball high into the air, aiming to catch it on his knee, but it bounced off, rolling across the playground toward a bench on the far side. Seated there was a man, his shoulders hunched, his face partially obscured by unkempt, bushy hair and a worn baseball cap. He looked as though he hadn't slept well in days, his clothes slightly tattered and hands rough from what seemed like years of hard labor. Emma glanced up in that moment, noticing Liam darting off after his ball. Her heart gave a small pang. There was something about the man's presence that unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As Liam neared, the man bent down, reaching for the soccer ball with hands that seemed to tremble. He looked up, his gaze meeting Liam's in a way that made time itself seem to slow. Liam's eyes widened as he took in the man's face. Those eyes, warm and familiar, held something indescribable, something that sparked a deep memory within him. The man stared back, his face etched with lines of pain and hardship, but his gaze softened as he looked at Liam. After what felt like an eternity, the man tossed the ball back to Liam, his movements awkward and uncertain. Without a word, he rose from the bench and walked away, glancing back only once before vanishing around the corner of the playground's brick restroom building. "Wait," Liam called out, already moving to follow. "Liam." Emma's voice cut through the silence, bringing him to a halt. Liam hesitated, looking back at his mother and then at the corner where the mysterious man had disappeared. Finally, he returned to Emma, but his face was alive with excitement. "Mom, I think I just saw Dad," he exclaimed, his voice brimming with an energy Emma had not seen in him in years. Emma's smile faded, her expression clouding with a mix of sadness and fear. She looked down at her son, her heart heavy. It had been 6 years since her husband, William, had disappeared. 6 years since she'd received the news of his death, an accident that had never truly been explained to her satisfaction. But he was gone, and she had been left to pick up the pieces for herself and her young son. "Liam," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's not funny. You know that your father, he's gone. Making up stories like this isn't fair." "But Mom, I'm serious." Liam's voice was insistent. "He looked just like Dad in the pictures. The same eyes, just like you told me." Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Liam, honey, your father isn't coming back. We have to let him rest." She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, feeling his small body tense with frustration and hurt. She didn't know how to make him understand, and the pain of that knowledge gnawed at her. But Liam remained silent in her embrace, his mind whirling. As his mother held him tightly, his gaze drifted back to the corner of the park where the man had disappeared. In his heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had just happened. Shadows of the past. That evening, the kitchen was filled with the familiar smells of dinner, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Emma moved mechanically, stirring the pasta sauce while lost in her thoughts. Every so often, She would glance over her shoulder at Liam, who sat at the dining table, unusually quiet as he twirled his fork in his spaghetti without eating a bite. He kept looking down, a small frown creasing his brow, as if trying to piece together a puzzle in his mind. The sight tugged at Emma's heart. Her little boy, always so full of life, was now subdued and distant, carrying a hope that she feared would only bring him pain. "Liam," she said gently, setting down her spoon and coming to sit across from him. "Are you all right?" Liam hesitated before speaking, looking up with eyes that were too serious for a child his age. "Mom, I know what I saw." He had Dad's eyes. "You told me that Dad's eyes could light up a room, remember? They were like that today." Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she looked into her son's hopeful gaze. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Sweetheart, I know you miss your dad. I miss him too. But sometimes, when we miss someone so much, we can imagine things. Our minds can play tricks on us." "But I wasn't imagining it." Liam's voice cracked, and he pulled his hand back, clutching it to his chest. "He was there, right in front of me. I could feel it. Mom, it was Dad." Emma felt her patience wavering, her own pain and grief threatening to break through. She forced herself to remain calm, swallowing the sharp words that rose to her lips. "Liam, we talked about this. I want you to focus on your schoolwork, on your friends. Your father, he's gone, and we need to accept that. We need to let him rest." Without another word, Liam nodded, his small shoulders slumping. He pushed his plate away and stood up, leaving the table. Emma watched him disappear down the hallway to his room, his head bowed in a way that made her heart ache. She knew he was hurting, and she hated feeling so helpless, unable to give him the comfort he so desperately sought. After tidying up the kitchen, Emma found herself drawn to the small box she kept at the back of the pantry. She pulled it out, brushing off the layer of dust that had settled over the years. Inside were a few keepsakes from her life with William, a photo album, an old leather wallet he used to carry, and a few letters he had written to her during their early days together. Emma opened the album and ran her fingers over the photos, each one a snapshot of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She lingered on a photo of William holding a much younger Liam, his smile wide and full of joy. The way he looked at their son, as if Liam was his whole world, was a look she would never forget. It was the same look Liam described seeing today. Could he have truly seen someone who looked that much like his father? Emma shook her head, trying to push the thought away. It was impossible. William was gone. And yet, there was a flicker of doubt in her mind. A small, insistent voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, something more was going on. Later that night, after Liam had fallen asleep, Emma reached out to her closest friend, Clara. Clara had been with her through everything. Through the agony of losing William, through the sleepless nights of raising Liam alone, and through every moment of grief and healing. If anyone could help her make sense of this, it was Clara. When Clara picked up, her voice was warm and familiar, instantly soothing Emma's frayed nerves. "Emma, is everything okay?" Emma took a shaky breath before launching into the story, explaining what had happened at the park and Liam's insistence that he'd seen his father. There was a pause on the other end before Clara spoke, her tone gentle but skeptical. "Emma, you know how kids are. Their imaginations can get the better of them, especially when they're dealing with loss. I mean, remember when my daughter swore she saw her grandmother at the store years after she passed?" Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, but Liam seems so certain. I've never seen him like this before. It wasn't just a passing thing. He really believes it." Clara hesitated, then offered, "Maybe it would give you peace of mind to go back to the park. Check if anyone's around. Sometimes just seeing it for yourself can help." Emma glanced at the clock. It was already past 9, and the thought of going to the park in the dark sent a chill down her spine. But a part of her was desperate to put this to rest. She needed to know, for her own peace of mind, that there was nothing there. "Maybe I will," she said finally. "After Liam goes to bed, I'll go over there, just for a few minutes." They chatted a bit longer, with Clara giving her the encouragement she needed, and by the time Emma hung up, she felt slightly more grounded. She went to check on Liam, who was already fast asleep, his small body curled up under the covers. She brushed a soft kiss on his forehead and whispered, "I love you, sweet boy. I'll always protect you, no matter what." As she closed his door, her heart ached. She wished she could make everything right, that she could bring his father back and fill the void that had grown in both of their lives. But life didn't work that way. All she could do was be there for him and hope it was enough. At around 10:30, after making sure Liam was sound asleep, Emma grabbed her jacket and slipped out the door. The night was quiet, with only the distant hum of traffic breaking the silence. She pulled her jacket tight around her shoulders as she walked toward the park, feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. The park was empty, its shadows long and eerie under the dim glow of the streetlights. The playground equipment cast dark shapes on the ground, and the stillness felt almost suffocating. Emma made her way to the bench where Liam had said he'd seen the man. She sat down, the cold metal pressing into her, and looked around, half expecting to see a familiar face emerge from the darkness. Minutes ticked by, marked only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze or the soft chirp of a distant cricket. Emma's heart raced as she sat there, every shadow and sound amplifying her anxiety. "What am I doing here?" she wondered, feeling slightly foolish. She was a grown woman, chasing ghosts in the middle of the night, trying to find answers that would only bring more questions. Just as she was about to leave, a soft shuffling sound broke the silence. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as she strained to see where the sound was coming from. A figure stepped into the faint light at the edge of the playground. A man, moving hesitantly, as if uncertain about being seen. Emma froze, her eyes fixed on the figure. He was partially hidden by the shadows, but as he moved closer, a beam of moonlight fell across his face, revealing features that were achingly familiar. The same eyes, the same gentle slope of his nose, the same wild hair that she used to run her fingers through. "William?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. The man stopped, his eyes meeting hers with a look of recognition and pain. Time seemed to stop as they stared at each other, neither daring to move. Then, as if snapped out of a trance, the man turned abruptly, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. "Wait," Emma called out, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. She jumped up, running after him, her feet pounding against the ground as she followed the path he had taken. But by the time she reached the edge of the trees, he was gone, lost in the thick shadows of the night. Emma stood there, her chest heaving, her heart racing with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief. She could still feel the intensity of his gaze, the way his eyes had held hers. There was no mistaking it. She had seen William, her William, after all these years. As she slowly made her way back home, her mind was a whirlwind of questions. If that was really him, where had he been? Why had he left? And why was he hiding now? By the time she crawled into bed, exhaustion tugged at her, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She lay awake for hours, her thoughts tangled and chaotic. Somewhere in the darkness, she made a promise to herself. She would get to the bottom of this mystery, no matter what it took. For herself, for Liam, and for the man she had once loved with all her heart. Unraveling secrets. The following morning dawned bright and clear, but Emma felt anything but calm. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on her mind, haunting her as she moved through her usual morning routine. She found herself glancing out the window every few minutes, as if expecting to see that familiar figure standing on the street, waiting for her to come outside. Her sleep-deprived mind was still reeling from the encounter. She had seen him. There was no mistaking those eyes. She had spent years looking at pictures of William, memorizing every detail of his face, every crease and line. And last night, he had looked at her with those same familiar eyes, just as real as he had been years ago. Liam, of course, had no idea about her nighttime excursion. He sat at the kitchen table, fully absorbed in his new fantasy book, spooning cereal into his mouth without looking up. Emma forced a smile as she handed him a glass of orange juice, determined to shield him from the storm of confusion raging inside her. But Liam was more observant than she gave him credit for. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, looking up with concern. "You look different, kind of tired." Emma chuckled softly, tussling his hair. "I just didn't sleep well, that's all," she said. "Busy mind." Liam's gaze grew serious, his small brows knitting together. "You're thinking about Dad, aren't you?" Emma's heart skipped a beat, caught off guard by the accuracy of his question. She considered brushing off this comment, but something inside her stopped her from doing so. She took a deep breath, crouching down so she was at his level. "Liam, you know how much I love you, right?" she asked, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes I miss your dad a lot, and sometimes it makes me a little sad. But you don't need to worry, okay? We're okay, you and me." Liam looked at her thoughtfully before nodding. "But if you do find him, you'll tell me, right?" Emma's throat tightened, and she managed a small nod. "Yes, honey. If anything changes, I'll tell you. I promise." After dropping Liam off at school, Emma found herself driving in the direction of Hope Haven Shelter, a place that held deep memories of her life with William. He had volunteered there frequently, helping to serve meals, sort donations, and talk with people who were down on their luck. He had always believed in giving back, in offering a hand to those who needed it. In fact, he'd spent so much time at Hope Haven that Emma often joked he should work there full-time. When William disappeared, she had visited the shelter only once, unable to bear the memories that clung to its walls. But now, with the possibility that he was somehow still out there, she felt compelled to return. It was as if something invisible was pulling her there, urging her to seek answers in the places he had once frequented. The shelter looked much the same as it had years ago. The brick building was modest and unassuming, with a worn sign that read Hope Haven Shelter above the door. Emma took a deep breath and stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim lighting. "Emma, is that really you?" She turned to see Mr. Harris, the shelter's manager, approaching her with a wide smile. His hair had turned completely gray, but his eyes were just as warm and welcoming as she remembered. "Mr. Harris," Emma greeted, smiling back as she shook his hand. "It's been a long time." "It has," he said, his smile fading slightly as he searched her face. "I heard about William, or at least what they said happened to him. I'm so sorry, Emma. He was a good man, one of the best." Emma nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "He really was, and I'm actually here because of him, in a way. I wanted to ask you something unusual." Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow, gesturing for her to continue. "Have you seen anyone around here recently who looked like William?" she asked, choosing her words carefully. "Or maybe someone who reminded you of him?" Mr. Harris' brow furrowed as he thought. "Funny you should ask that," he said slowly, crossing his arms. "Last week, I thought I saw someone who looked just like him. He was outside, near the donation bins. I only caught a glimpse of him, but something about his posture, the way he moved, it reminded me of William. But when I went outside, he was already gone." Emma's heart pounded as she listened. "Did you get a good look at him?" Mr. Harris shook his head, a regretful look on his face. "No, he vanished before I could get close. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was seeing what I wanted to see. But now that you're asking, maybe it was him." Emma felt a mix of relief and anxiety flood through her. If Mr. Harris had seen him too, it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. William, or someone who looked like him, was truly out there. But why was he hiding? And where had he been all this time? They chatted a bit longer, with Mr. Harris reminiscing about William's time at the shelter. As she listened, Emma felt a renewed sense of determination. She needed to follow every lead, no matter how small, to uncover the truth. She couldn't rest until she knew what had happened to her husband. After leaving the shelter, she picked Liam up from school early. They drove home in silence, Liam sensing her distracted state and choosing not to ask questions. Once home, Emma sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing with possibilities. If William was alive, she had to find a way to reach him. But she couldn't rely on chance encounters at the park or the shelter. She needed a more concrete plan. An idea began to form in her mind, one that was both practical and unexpected. She turned to Liam, who was flipping through his book at the kitchen table. "Liam, I have a question for you," she began. "What do you think about setting up cameras around the house? You know, for security." Liam's eyes lit up with excitement. "You mean, like surveillance cameras? Like the ones Tyler's family has?" Emma nodded. "Yes. If Dad is really out there, and if he ever comes near the house, we'll catch him on camera." Liam looked at her with wide eyes, nodding eagerly. "That's a great idea, Mom. We could see him, like right here in our yard, or on the porch. And if he's out there, we'll know for sure." Emma called a security company, explaining her need for discreet but comprehensive coverage of the property. By the next morning, a team arrived to install cameras at strategic points around the house: the front door, back door, garage, and a few angled to cover the yard. The lead technician walked her through how to access the footage on her phone, explaining the basics of the system. "All set," he said, giving her a reassuring smile as he left. "You'll be able to check in on your property anytime, anywhere." Once they were alone, Emma turned to Liam. "All right, sweetheart. Now we need to live normally. We can't spend all our time watching the cameras, okay?" Liam nodded, but she could see the excitement dancing in his eyes. She knew he'd be checking the footage often, hoping to catch a glimpse of his father. The next day passed quietly, with Emma working her shift at the restaurant while Liam went to school. But every chance she got, she glanced at her phone, half expecting to see William's face appear on the screen. Nothing unusual appeared on the footage, but the anticipation weighed on her, a constant reminder of the mystery she was trying to solve. It was late that night, just as Emma was beginning to drift off to sleep, that the doorbell rang. The sound jolted her awake, and she immediately checked the security app on her phone. The screen showed two men in dark suits standing on her front porch, their faces stern and unfriendly. Emma's heart raced as she threw on a robe and rushed to the door. She cracked it open, keeping the chain lock in place as she peered out at the strangers. "Mrs. Thompson?" a taller man asked, his voice rough and businesslike. "We need to talk about William Thompson." Emma's stomach twisted with anxiety as she stared at them. "My husband passed away 6 years ago," she said, her voice firm. "I don't know what you want, but he's gone. There's nothing for you here." The shorter man stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. "We're debt collectors, Mrs. Thompson, and we have reason to believe you've been looking for your husband, asking questions, installing security cameras. This is strange behavior for someone who believes her spouse is dead." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. These men knew more than she was comfortable with, and their presence was both unsettling and intimidating. "I'm not hiding anything," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The cameras are for home security. You have no right to be here." The taller man leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "We'll be watching, Mrs. Thompson, and we'll be back if we find out you're lying." Without another word, they turned and left, leaving her standing in the doorway, shaken and confused. She quickly locked the door, leaning against it as she tried to calm her racing heart. Who were these men, and what did they want with William's memory? As she turned away from the door, she saw Liam standing at the top of the stairs, his face pale with worry. "Mom, who were those people?" Emma forced a smile, though her heart was still pounding. "Just some confused businessmen, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Liam didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Emma walked him back to bed, staying with him until his breathing slowed and he fell asleep. Then she returned to her own room, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who were those men? And why had they been watching her? More importantly, if William was alive, had he been hiding from people like them all along? Emma's hands shook as she lay back down, staring at the ceiling. One thing was clear: she was now in deeper than she had ever imagined. And if she wanted to find the truth, she had to be prepared for whatever secrets lay ahead, no matter how dark they might be. Into the shadows. The next morning, Emma awoke with a sense of purpose and determination she hadn't felt in years. Her encounter with the mysterious men on her doorstep had rattled her, but it had also cemented her resolve. If William was alive, if he was truly out there somewhere, she needed to know why he had stayed away for so long, and why these men were so intent on keeping her in the dark. After dropping Liam off at school, she called Clara and explained the situation in hushed tones, her hand gripping the steering wheel as she recounted the visit from the men in suits. Clara's usual warmth faded, replaced by a tense silence on the other end. "Emma, this sounds serious," Clara finally said. "These men don't sound like ordinary debt collectors. They sound dangerous." "I know," Emma replied, her voice a mix of fear and determination. "I just don't understand why they're so interested in William, or why they think I'm hiding something." Clara was quiet for a moment before offering, "Remember, William volunteered at Hope Haven Shelter, right? And there was Mr. Samuel, you know, the older gentleman who ran that odd jobs network around town. William used to help him out, especially when the shelter had fundraisers or events." Emma nodded, remembering how William had often talked about Samuel. Samuel was a mysterious figure around town, known for his generosity and his odd network of contacts. Some people said he had friends in high places. Others whispered that he had a shady past. But to William, Samuel had always been a mentor and a friend. "Do you think Samuel might know something?" Emma asked, her heart pounding at the thought. "Maybe he knows what happened to William, or why those men are after him." "It's possible," Clara replied, her tone cautious. "But be careful, Emma. Samuel might not be the easiest person to approach, especially if he's somehow involved in all of this. He's a good man, but he's also, well, let's just say he has his own way of handling things." That afternoon, after picking up Liam from school and leaving him with Clara, Emma drove across town to the small, hidden office where Samuel conducted most of his business. It was an unmarked brick building with only a faded "office space for rent" sign hanging above the door. Most people in town didn't even know the building belonged to Samuel. Those who did only found out by word of mouth. She took a deep breath before knocking. The door opened slightly, revealing Samuel's familiar, weathered face. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, scanned her with both surprise and concern. "Emma," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "It's been a long time. Come in." Emma stepped inside, feeling the weight of his gaze on her as she walked into his small office. It was filled with stacks of paper, old books, and a faded leather chair that looked as though it had been through a lifetime of stories. "I didn't expect to see you here," Samuel said, motioning for her to sit across from him. "But judging by the look on your face, I'd say this isn't a social visit." Emma swallowed, gathering her courage. "Samuel, I need to ask you something about William. I think he might still be alive." Samuel's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite identify. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands thoughtfully. "Go on," he said quietly. Emma took a deep breath, recounting the recent events. Liam's encounter at the park, her own sighting of a man who looked like William, the strange men who had shown up on her doorstep, and the camera she had installed to try and catch a glimpse of him. Through it all, Samuel listened in silence, his face impassive, but his eyes sharp and watchful. When she finished, he leaned forward, his gaze intense. Emma, I've known William for a long time. Longer than most people in this town. And if he's alive, he has a good reason for staying hidden. But why? Emma asked, frustration and desperation mingling in her voice. Why would he leave us like this? Why would he let us think he was dead? Samuel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. It's complicated, he said slowly. There are things William got involved in that were risky, dangerous even. He was helping me with some sensitive work. What kind of work? Emma pressed, her heart pounding. She had always known that Samuel's business dealings weren't exactly straightforward, but she had trusted William's judgment. He had always assured her that Samuel was trustworthy, that whatever he was doing was for a good cause. But now she wasn't so sure. Emma, what I'm about to tell you stays between us, Samuel said, his voice low and serious. William was helping me investigate some high-profile figures in this town, people who were exploiting the vulnerable, taking advantage of those who couldn't fight back. He knew it was risky, but he wanted to make a difference. He believed it was worth it. Emma's breath caught as she listened, her mind reeling. This was a side of William she hadn't known, a side that had been willing to risk everything to stand up for what he believed in. But why would he disappear? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would he leave us behind? Because he got too close, Samuel replied, his gaze darkening. He found something he wasn't supposed to find, something that put him, and you and Liam, in grave danger. These people, they're not the kind to leave loose ends. They would have come after you and Liam if William had stayed. Emma felt a cold chill settle over her. She remembered the men in suits, their thinly veiled threats, and the way they had watched her every move. Was this the danger William had been trying to protect them from? So he faked his death, she said, piecing it together. To protect us. But why now? Why show up after all this time? Samuel hesitated, his gaze softening as he looked at her. I don't know, Emma. Maybe he thought it was safe to come back. Maybe he couldn't stay away any longer. But whatever his reason, if he's resurfaced, it means one of two things. Either the people who were after him are gone, or he's in more danger than ever. Emma sat in silence, trying to process everything. She thought of Liam, who had gone to bed every night for years, clutching the last photo he had of his father. She thought of herself, waiting, hoping for answers that had never come. What do I do, Samuel? She whispered. How do I find him? Samuel leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. If you really want to find William, there's one more place you should check. It's risky, but it's a place he used to go when he needed to disappear. An old cabin, deep in the forest. Not many people know about it. Emma nodded, a renewed sense of purpose filling her. Give me the directions. I'll go tonight. Samuel scribbled the directions on a scrap of paper, handing it to her with a stern look. Be careful, Emma. And if you see anyone suspicious, don't stop. Just get out of there. There's no telling who might be watching. That evening, after putting Liam to bed and making sure Clara would check on him if needed, Emma set out for the cabin, following Samuel's directions carefully. The drive was long and winding, taking her far beyond the edge of town and deep into the forest. The road narrowed as she went, the trees closing in around her, their shadows stretching long and eerie in the headlights. She drove in silence, her heart pounding as the cabin finally came into view. A small, weathered building tucked away in the trees, almost invisible in the darkness. Emma parked the car and stepped out, her breath forming small clouds in the cool night air. The cabin was silent, its windows dark, but there was a strange pull that drew her toward it. She took a step forward, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and anticipation. William, she called softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. There was no answer. She took a deep breath, steeling herself as she moved toward the cabin door. It creaked open under her hand, revealing a small, dimly lit interior. The furniture was sparse and worn, a single wooden table, a cot in the corner, and a few empty shelves lining the walls. The air was thick with dust, as if no one had been there in years. But as she moved further inside, something caught her eye. A small folded piece of paper lying on the table, its edges worn and yellowed. Emma's heart raced as she picked it up, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The note was written in William's familiar handwriting, each letter carefully crafted, as if he had taken his time with every word. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay away any longer. I've missed you and Liam more than words can say, but I can't come back yet. Not until I know it's safe. If you're looking for me, follow the signs I've left. Trust no one but Samuel. I'll find a way to see you soon. All my love. Always. William." Emma sank into the chair, clutching the note to her chest as tears filled her eyes. He was alive. He was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back to them. She sat there for a long time, letting the reality of it wash over her. William was alive. And despite everything, he still loved her and Liam. He had been willing to sacrifice everything to keep them safe. As she finally stood to leave, a new determination filled her. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing. She would follow it, no matter how far it took her, until she found the man she loved. But as she stepped out of the cabin and back into the cold night air, a strange feeling settled over her, a sense that she was being watched. She glanced around, her heart racing as she scanned the shadows, but saw nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere was keeping a close eye on her every move. Clutching the note tightly, she made her way back to the car, glancing over her shoulder as she drove away from the cabin. She knew she was closer than ever to finding William, but she also knew the danger was far from over. The shadows were closing in, and if she wanted to bring William home, she would have to be ready to face whatever lay ahead. The trap. Emma's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove back from the cabin, William's note safely tucked in her pocket. The forest closed in around her as she navigated the winding road, her headlights cutting through the darkness. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief, confusion, and an underlying fear that she couldn't quite shake. William was alive. Somewhere out there, he was waiting for the right moment to return to them. But what would it take for him to feel safe again? And what was he hiding from? By the time she arrived home, it was past midnight. She parked the car quietly and slipped inside, checking on Liam before retreating to her own room. She was exhausted, but her mind refused to quiet down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his handwriting on the note, each word etched with the same care he'd always shown her. It was both a comfort and a reminder that something dark and dangerous was keeping them apart. She lay awake until dawn, finally drifting into a fitful sleep as the first rays of sunlight filtered through her curtains. The following morning, Emma felt like a ghost moving through the motions of daily life. After dropping Liam at school, she decided to visit Samuel again. He was the only person who knew William's past and could help her understand the threats that might still linger. If William's life was at risk, then she needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. When she arrived at Samuel's office, the door was already open, as if he'd been expecting her. He looked up from his cluttered desk, his expression softening when he saw the exhaustion and worry on her face. "You found the cabin, didn't you?" he asked, his voice a blend of understanding and caution. Emma nodded, pulling out the note and placing it on his desk. "He left this for me," she said quietly. "He wants me to follow some kind of sign he left. He said to trust no one but you." Samuel read the note carefully, his expression growing darker with each passing second. Finally, he looked up, his eyes sharp. "This confirms it," he said. "William's still in hiding, and he's not sure it's safe yet. But he wouldn't leave that note unless he was planning something. He wants you to find him, but he also wants to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Emma's voice wavered with a mix of anger and fear. What did he get involved in that was so dangerous? Samuel leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. It all started with a series of exposes he was working on. He uncovered some deep-rooted corruption in town. I don't know the full extent of it myself, but I know he was looking into a group that operated under the radar. It was a network of influential people with connections to high-stakes finance, and they weren't exactly ethical. Emma swallowed, her pulse quickening. Why would he risk everything to expose them? Samuel gave her a sad smile. Because that's who he was, Emma. William couldn't stand to see people hurt or taken advantage of. He believed that if he didn't speak up, he was part of the problem. But he didn't realize just how powerful and ruthless these people were. Emma listened in silence, her hands clenched in her lap. She had known William was a good man, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. So where does that leave us? She asked. How do I find him? Samuel took a deep breath. If he left signs, they might lead you to a place he considers safe. But if you're going to follow them, you need to be very careful. These people don't leave loose ends. If they find out you're looking for William, they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to silence you. Emma nodded, determination hardening her resolve. I understand, but I'm not backing down. I'm going to find him. Samuel reached across the desk, placing a firm hand on hers. Then let me help you, he said. I know people who can keep an eye on things from a distance, people who can let me know if anything unusual starts happening, and I'll be there every step of the way. Over the next few days, Emma meticulously searched for any signs William might have left. She scored places they had frequented together: the park, the old library, and the diner where they'd had their first date. At each location, she kept an eye out for anything that felt out of place, any subtle clue he might have left behind. Days turned into weeks, with Emma juggling her search while trying to keep life as normal as possible for Liam. She kept him in the dark about her investigation, afraid of the questions it might raise and the hope it might stir in his young heart. But it was becoming harder to keep her focus. Every time she checked the security cameras, her heart would race, hoping for a glimpse of William, but the footage was always empty, the house quiet. One evening, as she scrolled through footage on her phone, she noticed something strange. A car she didn't recognize had parked just a few houses down. It wasn't unusual for a car to be parked on their street, but this one had appeared twice in the past week, always at odd hours. It wasn't the debt collectors. She would have recognized them, but there was something about the way the car sat, idling, that set her on edge. The next day, Emma decided to drive past the cabin once more, hoping for any additional clues. As she navigated the twisting forest road, a sense of dread began to settle over her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trees, and the dense foliage around her seemed to close in, amplifying the sense of isolation. When she reached the cabin, she stepped out of her car, the crunch of gravel beneath her feet echoing in the stillness. She moved toward the door, hesitating before pushing it open. The cabin was dark and silent, just as it had been the last time. But something felt different. A faint scent lingered in the air, a hint of William's cologne, mixed with the smell of old wood. "William?" she called softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. The silence pressed in around her. She was about to turn and leave when she noticed a small folded piece of paper tucked under the edge of the cot. Her heart raced as she picked it up, unfolding it with trembling hands. "Meet me at the train station. Midnight. Come alone." She read the note twice, her pulse hammering in her ears. It was his handwriting, no doubt about it. But why the train station? Why now? Emma left the cabin quickly, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. She drove home, her mind racing with questions. That night, she made excuses to Liam, telling him she had to run an errand. She tucked him into bed early, feeling the weight of guilt for lying to him, but knowing that she had no other choice. If this was a chance to finally see William, to get the answers she so desperately needed, she couldn't let it slip away. As the clock struck midnight, Emma arrived at the deserted train station. The air was cold, and a light mist hung in the air, giving the platform an eerie, dreamlike quality. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself, her breath visible in the cool night air as she waited, her eyes scanning the shadows. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. She was about to turn back, her hope beginning to waver, when she heard the faint sound of footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. But as he stepped into the light, she saw his face clearly. The same warm eyes, the same slightly crooked nose, the same unruly hair that had once been so familiar. "William?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Emma, I'm so sorry." She took a step forward, barely able to contain the flood of emotions surging through her. "Why, William? Why did you leave us? Why didn't you come back?" He looked away, pain etched into every line of his face. "I didn't want to leave, but I had no choice. I got too close to something dangerous, something that could have put you and Liam in harm's way. I thought if I disappeared, if I stayed away, you'd be safe." Emma's anger flared, the years of hurt and confusion bubbling to the surface. "Safe? William, we've been living in limbo, not knowing if you were dead or alive. Liam has been waiting for you every single day, asking questions I couldn't answer. How could you do that to us?" He looked down, guilt written across his face. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was wrong to think I could protect you by staying away. But now, it's different. The people I was running from, they'd found me again. They're watching, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Emma's mind spun, trying to process his words. "What do they want, William?" "They want to silence me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have information, documents, proof of what they've been doing. If it gets out, they'll lose everything. But if they find out I've contacted you—" He broke off, his gaze flickering over his shoulder, as if he expected someone to emerge from the shadows. Emma felt a surge of fear, her heart pounding. "Then why meet me here? Why take this risk?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flash drive and pressing it into her hand. "This has everything. Names, transactions, evidence that ties them to everything they've been doing. If something happens to me, take it to Samuel. He'll know what to do." Emma's hand tightened around the flash drive, her mind racing. "William, please, don't disappear again. We can face this together. I can't go through this without you." He looked at her, his expression softening, and for a moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I want nothing more than to come home to you and Liam. But until this is over, until they're stopped, I can't put you both in that kind of danger." Before she could respond, he leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Stay safe, Emma. Keep Liam safe. I'll find a way to come back to you." And with that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Emma standing alone on the platform, her heart aching and her mind reeling. She clutched the flash drive, feeling its cold metal against her palm. A small piece of William, a small hope that he would come back. But as she made her way back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The shadows were closing in, and whatever was coming, she knew it would be a fight for their lives. The final reckoning. Emma drove home in a daze, clutching the flash drive as if it were a lifeline. Her mind raced as she navigated the quiet streets, the gravity of what William had entrusted her with sinking in. The evidence he had given her was everything. Proof of the corruption that had forced him into hiding, proof of the lives they had torn apart. But holding it felt like holding a bomb, one that could either save her family or destroy it entirely. She slipped into the house quietly, checking on Liam before retreating to her room. She locked the door and sat at her desk, plugging the flash drive into her laptop with shaking hands. The screen blinked to life, and a folder titled "Truth" appeared. She opened it, her breath catching as she scanned the documents, photos, and recordings inside. There were bank statements, transactions funneled through shadowy accounts tied to prominent local figures, politicians, business owners, even a few officials she recognized. They were all implicated. They had funneled money through charity funds and community development projects, but the funds had never reached their destinations. Instead, they were siphoned into private accounts, funding lavish lifestyles and covering up scandal after scandal. At the heart of it all was a man named Charles Rowe, a wealthy developer who had spent years building a pristine public image. But the files painted a different picture, a man who exploited his power, using his wealth to silence anyone who threatened his empire. Emma's hands trembled as she read through the evidence, her heart pounding with the realization that these were the people who had driven William into hiding. The people who had forced him to leave his family behind, fearing for their safety. If this information went public, it would destroy them. But it would also make Emma a target, just as it had made William a fugitive. As the first rays of dawn crept through her window, Emma closed her laptop, her mind reeling. She had a choice to make. A choice that could either expose these powerful people and put an end to their corruption or risk everything for her family's safety. She couldn't make this decision alone, but there was one person she trusted completely: Samuel. Later that morning, Emma drove to Samuel's office with the flash drive tucked safely in her bag. She could feel the weight of it, like a ticking time bomb. When she arrived, Samuel was already waiting, his expression serious as he ushered her inside. She placed the flash drive on his desk, watching as he examined it with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. "He gave this to you?" Samuel asked, his voice low. Emma nodded. "He said it has everything. Names, transactions, proof of what they've been doing. He told me to bring it to you if anything happened to him." Samuel plugged the flash drive into his computer, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the files. This is more than I expected," he murmured. "This isn't just proof. It's a complete map of their operations. He must have spent years gathering all of this." Emma swallowed, the weight of William's sacrifice pressing down on her. "So what do we do with it?" Samuel sat back, his face thoughtful. "If we release this to the public, it will cause an uproar. These men are deeply rooted in the community, and their reach extends far beyond what we see on the surface. But if we go to the authorities, there's a risk they'll try to bury it. People like Rowe have ways of making things disappear." Emma clenched her fists, anger and frustration boiling within her. "They forced William to leave us, to live like a ghost. They threatened my family, my son. I can't just let them get away with it." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then we need to be strategic. If we're going to expose them, we need to make sure they have no time to cover their tracks. We need to strike all at once, from multiple angles." He reached for his phone, dialing a number and speaking in hushed tones. After a brief conversation, he hung up and turned to Emma. "I have some contacts in the press, people I trust. We'll make copies of the evidence, send them to multiple news outlets and independent journalists. Once the story breaks, it will be impossible to silence." Emma felt a flicker of hope, tempered by a sense of dread. She knew they were about to unleash something that couldn't be undone. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Samuel replied, his expression grim. "Once we start, it won't take long for Rowe's people to realize what's happening. They'll come after us, and they won't hold back. Are you prepared for that?" Emma took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I have to be. For Liam, for William, for everything they've taken from us." They spent the next few hours making copies of the files, encrypting them, and preparing them for release. Emma's heart pounded as she watched the clock, every second bringing them closer to the point of no return. At precisely noon, Samuel hit send, dispatching the files to a carefully selected network of journalists. They had arranged for the story to go live simultaneously across multiple platforms, ensuring that the information would be accessible to as many people as possible. Once it was out, there would be no turning back. As they waited for the first reports to go live, Emma's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at the screen, her heart leaping as she recognized the number. It was William. "Be careful. They're watching. Meet me tonight, by the river. It's time to end this." Emma's heart raced as she read the message. She showed it to Samuel, who nodded grimly. "This is it. They're going to come for him. And they'll come for you too. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Emma nodded, steeling herself. "I'm ready." She returned home, spending the day with Liam, trying to keep up the facade of normalcy. She read with him, helped him with his homework, and made his favorite dinner. But as night fell, her anxiety grew. She put Liam to bed, whispering a promise that she would keep him safe, no matter what. She would do whatever it took to bring his father back and put an end to the nightmare they had been living. When the clock struck midnight, Emma made her way to the river, following the same winding path she and William had taken so many times before. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified by the stillness of the night. She arrived at the secluded clearing by the water, her heart pounding as she scanned the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, and Emma felt a surge of relief and fear as she recognized William. He looked thinner, wearier, but his eyes held the same warmth she remembered. "Emma," he said softly, stepping toward her. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek as if reassuring himself that she was real. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," she replied, her voice trembling. "We sent the files to the press. It's all out there now. They won't be able to hide." A shadow passed over his face, a mix of relief and resignation. "Then it's over. They'll come for us, Emma. They won't stop until we're gone." Before Emma could respond, a rustling in the bushes made her freeze. She turned, her heart pounding as two men stepped into the clearing, their faces obscured by the darkness. But she recognized them immediately, the same men who had come to her doorstep, the debt collectors who had been watching her every move. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," the taller man sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble." William stepped in front of Emma, his stance protective. "It's over. The evidence is out there. Your bosses can't cover it up anymore." The shorter man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think we care about that? We're here to tie up loose ends." Emma's pulse raced as she backed away, her gaze darting to William. They were cornered, trapped in the clearing with no way out. She felt a surge of fear, but also a fierce determination. She wouldn't let these men take her family from her. Not again. William's hand found hers, his grip strong and reassuring. He glanced at her, his eyes full of resolve. "Run, Emma. Get to Liam." "No," she whispered, refusing to leave him behind. "We do this together." Before the men could react, Samuel emerged from the shadows behind them, holding a pistol aimed steadily at the taller man. His voice was calm, almost casual. "I'd think twice about whatever you're planning, gentlemen. The authorities know exactly where we are. If anything happens to them, you'll be the first suspects." The men froze, exchanging a glance. Samuel's unexpected arrival had shifted the balance, giving them a fighting chance. But Emma could see the desperation in their eyes. They had nothing left to lose. The taller man sneered, taking a step forward. "You think we're afraid of a washed-up old man?" Samuel's expression didn't waver. "You should be." In that moment, the silence shattered. A flurry of movement erupted as the two men lunged forward. Samuel fired, the sharp crack of the gun echoing through the night. One of the men fell, clutching his shoulder, but the other kept advancing, his gaze locked on Emma and William. William pushed her behind him, his stance unyielding. But before the man could reach them, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Blue and red lights flashed through the trees as a fleet of police cars pulled up, officers spilling out and surrounding the clearing. The remaining man froze, his face pale as the officers closed in. He dropped to his knees, his hands raised in surrender. The authorities had arrived, finally putting an end to the nightmare that had haunted them for so long. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her as the officers took the men into custody, her hand still tightly gripping William's. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "It's over," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "We're free." Emma clung to him, tears streaming down her face as the weight of everything they had endured finally lifted. She had her family back. They had faced the darkness and emerged, scared but whole. They drove home together, the dawn breaking as they pulled into the driveway. Liam was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the ordeal his parents had gone through to keep him safe. Emma watched as William knelt by Liam's bed, brushing a gentle hand over their son's hair, his eyes filled with love and relief. For the first time in years, they were a family again. The past could never be erased, but they had survived it. And as they stood together in the quiet morning light, Emma knew they were finally free to build a new future, one filled with hope, resilience, and the love that had carried them through the darkest of nights. Rebuilding the dream. In the days following the confrontation by the river, Emma, William, and Liam settled into a new rhythm, though remnants of their ordeal lingered in subtle ways. The weight of the past few years, the months of hiding, and the recent danger left marks on their hearts, but they were finally free to focus on their future together. With Roe and his associates behind bars, life in their small town gradually returned to normal. Yet for Emma and William, normal had taken on a whole new meaning. The town was abuzz with news of the scandal that had torn through its upper echelons. Charles Roe's empire crumbled almost overnight as details of his corruption spread like wildfire. The press didn't hold back, and as the story took on national attention, new investigations opened, exposing layers of deceit, blackmail, and financial exploitation that had gone on for years. For once, the powerful were being held accountable, and for Emma, the knowledge that they had played a part in ending that cycle of corruption was deeply fulfilling. But despite their triumph, William remained cautious. The trauma of his years on the run had left him wary, and even in freedom, he struggled to feel truly safe. He often lingered by the windows, glancing outside as if expecting someone to be watching. Emma noticed this, and one evening, as they sat together on the back porch, she reached over and took his hand. "We don't have to be afraid anymore, William," she said softly, her thumb tracing comforting circles on his hand. "They're gone. Roe and his men can't touch us." William managed a small smile, nodding as he laced his fingers with hers. "I know. It's just going through that, spending all those years hiding. I didn't know if I'd ever see you and Liam again. It's going to take time." Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "We'll take all the time you need. But we're in this together. No more running." He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over their quiet backyard, each lost in thoughts of the life they would rebuild together. As they settled back into their routine, William realized he needed to redefine his purpose. His years of hiding had deprived him of work, of meaningful connections, and he was determined to make up for lost time. One evening, as he, Emma, and Liam sat at the dinner table, he brought up an idea that had been stirring in his mind. "I know it might seem sudden," he began, glancing at Emma, "but I was thinking, what if we opened a restaurant together?" Emma blinked in surprise, her fork halfway to her mouth. "A restaurant? Really?" William nodded, his eyes lighting up with a spark of excitement she hadn't seen in years. "Yes, we've both been through so much, and I want to put down roots, to create something lasting. And cooking was always something that grounded me. I want to share that with people, to create a place where others can find comfort, the way you and Liam did for me." Liam grinned, bouncing in his chair. "A restaurant? Can we have cool stuff like a dessert bar? And maybe a space for kids to draw?" Emma laughed, her heart warming at the idea. "William, I think it's a wonderful idea, but it's a huge commitment, and it's a lot of work. Are you sure you're ready for that?" William's gaze was steady as he looked at her, more than anything, I've spent too many years hiding. I want to build something real, something that's ours. I want us to build this together." Emma's eyes filled with emotion, and she reached across the table, taking his hand. "Then let's do it. Let's make this dream a reality." Over the next few months, they threw themselves into planning the restaurant. Samuel, ever supportive, helped them secure an ideal location in town, a cozy building with high windows, exposed brick walls, and a spacious kitchen in the back. The building needed work, but as they spent long hours cleaning, painting, and designing the space, it began to transform into something beautiful, a true labor of love. Emma had a knack for aesthetics, and she took charge of designing the restaurant's interior. She chose warm, earthy colors, distressed wooden tables, and a wall lined with potted plants that added a touch of greenery to the space. She decorated the walls with family photos and pieces of local art, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and welcoming. She wanted every guest to feel as if they were stepping into a family gathering, a place where they could relax and connect over good food. William poured himself into perfecting the menu. His time in hiding had taught him to be resourceful, and he brought that creativity into his cooking. He spent countless hours experimenting with recipes, determined to make every dish an experience. His passion for food came alive in every plate, from hearty comfort dishes to delicate desserts. He crafted each dish with the care he might give to a loved one, infusing his food with the joy he felt at being able to cook for his community. The restaurant quickly became a family project. Liam, excited to be part of the venture, insisted on contributing in his own way. He created a small kids' corner in the restaurant, a space with a chalkboard wall, crayons, and coloring books. He even designed a kids' choice menu with simple, customizable dishes, a nod to his friends who often came by after school. His pride in his contributions was evident, and Emma and William cherished his enthusiasm. Finally, the grand opening day arrived, and the town gathered outside to see what the new restaurant was all about. The air was filled with excitement as the doors opened, revealing the space Emma and William had worked so hard to create. The restaurant was named Second Chances Bistro, a tribute to their journey and the new beginning they had been given. The opening night was a resounding success. The dining area filled quickly, with guests marveling at the warmth and authenticity of the space. Samuel made a point of telling everyone who would listen about the years he had known William, proudly recounting his resilience and dedication. Old friends and new faces alike gathered around the tables, savoring William's carefully crafted dishes. But the moment that touched Emma the most was when she saw Liam proudly leading his friends to the kids' corner, his face beaming with excitement. He was finally seeing his family as whole again, and in his eyes, she saw the hope and security she had fought so hard to give him. As the evening wound down, William called Emma over to the kitchen, a plate of their best-selling dish in his hands. They took a moment to step outside onto the back patio, where the quiet of the night contrasted with the bustling energy inside. "It's everything I dreamed of," William murmured, gazing at the stars above them. "I don't think I ever imagined I'd feel at peace again." Emma leaned into him, her heart swelling with pride and love. "We've built something beautiful, something that's ours. And I think this is just the beginning." William smiled, wrapping his arms around her. "Thank you, Emma, for believing in me, for fighting for us, and for being my home when I couldn't find it in myself." They stood in comfortable silence, basking in the calm of the night and the satisfaction of a dream realized. As Second Chances Bistro grew in popularity, Emma and William found themselves thriving in their new roles. They became known not just for their food, but for the kindness and warmth they showed each customer. The restaurant became a gathering place for the community, a sanctuary for those who needed a reminder of the goodness in the world. Every Sunday, they closed early and reserved the evening for family night, inviting local families and offering a special menu filled with comfort foods and desserts that even the pickiest children loved. It was a night filled with laughter, stories, and a sense of unity that reminded them of why they had started the restaurant in the first place. One evening, as they were closing up after a particularly busy day, a familiar face walked in. It was one of the journalists who had covered Roe's trial, a woman who had been instrumental in bringing the story to light. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, extending her hand, "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, a lot of people are finding justice. Roe's trial has inspired new investigations, and more families are stepping forward with stories. Your courage, it's making a difference." Emma's heart swelled with pride, and she squeezed the woman's hand. "Thank you," she replied. "It means the world to know that this is bigger than us, that others are finding their own freedom." After the journalist left, Emma joined William in the kitchen, where he was cleaning up for the night. She relayed the conversation to him, and he paused, his expression softening. "We went through so much," he said quietly. "But if it means that others will be free from people like Roe, then it was worth it. I can finally let it go." Emma wrapped her arms around him, resting her head against his chest. They had walked through fire, but they had come out the other side stronger together. And as she looked around at the space they had created, she felt a deep sense of peace, a contentment that came from knowing they had finally found their way home. The years that followed were filled with joy, challenges, and new beginnings. Second Chance's Bistro became a beloved fixture in the community, a place where people could gather, celebrate, and heal. Liam grew up with the restaurant as a second home, learning from his parents the value of resilience, integrity, and love. And for Emma and William, every day was a reminder of the life they had fought for, the family they had saved, and the love that had carried them through. They were no longer haunted by shadows, but were free to embrace the light, building a legacy that would endure, a legacy of hope, redemption, and second chances.